Sega launches the SegaCD. Nintendo and Sony kiss and make up. And Intel goes multitasking. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time 40, 30, and well, that's it nowadays, years, to find out what was happening in the video game and home computer industries of yesteryear. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Mads. Welcome back to the show, Mads.
Back by popular demand, or
Definitely.
something along those lines.
Definitely. It was a very popular request. So, what you been up to?
What have I been up to? Well, as you know, actually, because you've been listening to the Playthrough podcast, I've been playing Red Dead Redemption. And you were just telling me how I misunderstood everything about that game, and I think I actually agree with you. I went to that game expecting a great narrative, a beautiful story that was well crafted and meant something, had some depth. But it really is just Grand Theft Horse, and as you said, it's a caricature of all of the spaghetti western tropes, so you get to play along with those, and yeah. I think that's the right way of seeing that game, actually.
It's just like the GTA franchise, the Red Dead Redemption franchise, at least the first Red Dead, and there's also Red Dead Revolver, but the first Red Dead Redemption, I haven't played the second one yet. It really is just the distilled essence of the spaghetti western genre. And the analogy I used was that those two franchises, Rockstar is basically channeling the spirit of Cinemaware, which was never really about a consistent emotional story of a single character. I mean, the closest they ever got was King of Chicago, but it was always about creating a game structure that allowed you to go through these mini games, these individual levels or scenes or missions or whatever you want to call it, that distilled the essence of what made a specific genre. And in this case, that genre is the spaghetti western. Mm-hmm. And for all the ludicrousness, the lowbrow humor, the needless violence, the very, very unlikable characters. Those are all the things that make a spaghetti western, that distinguish them. And if you go into the history of spaghetti westerns, there's some very good documentaries about it and stuff. And you see the areas of Italy and the economic situation of the people that those movies were targeted at, you really see that they are beautifully crafted specifically for what they were trying to do. And Rockstar has really captured the essence and spirit of those in Red Dead Redemption. And once you accept that and you don't think that the narrative, which is literally nonsense, okay, if you're attaching yourself to that, I'm sorry, but no, there's better narratives out there. It's like Lord of the Rings. It's just an excuse. It's a MacGuffin to get you from one kick-ass action, typical spaghetti western scene to the next. That's it.
Yep.
Brilliant.
And seeing as that, I actually enjoyed this last part I've been playing of it, when I finally decided to not care about the narrative at all and just have fun and wreak havoc in the world of this western setting. I had fun, and probably needed to have done that a long time ago.
What was the tagline of the movie Dr. Strangelove? It was Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Just Love the Bomb, or something like that.
Yeah, something along those lines. Yes.
That's the philosophy here. So.
Yep.
Okay.
So somebody should have told me that before, but he didn't.
You didn't ask me. See, you guys haven't had me on the show yet because I don't have time to play any games. I'm too busy with the research for this show. But I will come in at the end and be the word of wisdom.
Sounds good.
Yeah, something like that. So, okay. We've got plenty of cool stories today as we travel back 30 years to December of 1992. So we're closing out the year. Some very, very interesting developments in a year that brought us the first real 3D games with Ultima Underworld and Wolfenstein. We've got, and I know there's been tons of 3D games before that, blah, 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 blah. The first ones that really matter. The launch of the Amiga 1200, the 16-bit wars are in full swing finally. This has been a very, very exciting year. We've got some good stories closing the year out. I'm hinting at what's coming. But before we do that, we have 2 orders of business. Number 1, got to do the obligatory plug. Everybody follow us on the socials, blah, blah, blah. Go to Patreon. We've got early access to interview episodes. Got a good one about 2 actually, about the battle between DirectX and OpenGL from the people who were there making that stuff. Or at least developing with it. And also you can support the show there and also get to watch the video version of our first segment, the 7 Minutes in Heaven, when our intrepid co-host must play one of the games reviewed in a publication dated December 1992 that they have never played before for 7 minutes. So, we had a lot of interesting titles. Faceball 2000 for the Super Nintendo, Super Mario Kart, Legends of Valor, Art of Fighting, Mortal Kombat in the arcades. But, wow, given...
Some of my favorite games were on this list, actually. I mean, Alone in the Dark and Goblins, for example, two games that really have a big place in my heart. But
both Goblins... And Goblins 2 is also.
Yeah, I saw you had Goblins 2 there as well. That's Goblins is older, so that must have been a re-release of some sort. But
it was the U.S. release. The U.S. release is coming about a year late, and Goblins 2 is already getting reviewed in European magazines.
Yeah,
because it's a French
I love
production.
Both of those games, but as somebody who actually replayed and played all the way through Goblins 2 again recently, I have to say that game. There's like 4 or 5 places where the puzzles are so convoluted and so hard that you need to have nostalgia for it or a walkthrough to actually play it again in 2023. But apart from that, it's a really good game.
All I have to say is I absolutely love the animation. I love the conceit of the game back in the day. And it frustrated me so much that I probably got to like the 4th screen and that was it. Because it was just too annoying. And plus I was playing it on an Amiga, so the load times were just murderous. So anytime you wanted to try something and it had to load a new animation, oh my god.
So I actually finished it on the Amiga back in the day. But,
wow.
I remember actually buying Amiga Joker, the German magazine.
Yeah.
And there was a demo of Goblins 2, and I had to get my hands on this game. So I played it all the way through I played that demo so many times, and then I played it all the way through on the Amiga at some point. I loved it, and I stuck with it, and I actually didn't use, and I can't, to this day, playing it today, I can't understand how I got through it without a solution. But I actually plugged at it and got away with getting all the way through without a solution back in the day.
I had a solution, and I still couldn't figure out what the hell to do. Now, this was in Goblins 1, by the way, but still.
Oh, Goblins 1, I only recently, last year, I finally finished that, because that was quite hard as well.
Yeah, that was the one that kind of broke me. I never even tried Goblins 2. Maybe they fixed enough of it that I need to go back, but yeah. Find the time. But
no,
that's not what we're here to
I chose something else. I chose something I've heard so many people talk about, and they often talk about the fact that there are scantily clad ladies in this game. So of course I had to pick it immediately when I saw that Night Trap for the Sega CD was here on the list, and I've never played that, so I needed to experience that. Sadly, I didn't get to any of the boobies, if that's what's there. But oh well.
Well, we'll talk all about that when we get back, and you're supposed to pretend that you haven't played it.
Sorry, I haven't. I'm really looking forward to playing it. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ. You can't get good help these days. Okay, are you ready for your 7 minutes in heaven?
I am.
Yes. Okay, then let's have at it.
Tony, this is all insane.
I tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen.
Listen to what? What are you talking about?
Ashley, I tried to save him from the odds, but you had to interfere, and now you will pay.
Tony, I don't understand. This is crazy.
Don't be foolish, Kelly. They wouldn't stand in my way. Would you?
Oh, thanks, Control. That was close.
Welcome back, Mads. So, for the uninitiated, how would you describe Night Trap based on your 7 minutes with the game?
As a horrid FMV experience where I get to choose between 8 different places in and around a house. I can watch live TV streams, video streams from those places, and then stuff happens there. And I get, because I have a controller that's even introduced, I like that fact, it was introduced in the game, the Genesis controller. You need to control the surveillance and traps with this control device. So I could switch between the rooms, and I could also activate traps, because every single room would have some traps. And the traps would be used to capture these blackly clad guys, ninjas, whatever. Not sure what they are. And then you need to... you don't actually know why you need to capture them, because you don't really know who the enemy is at this point in time. I suspect it's actually the family living there and not the guys in black, because I think they're vampires and they're killing these teenagers. But the teenagers are coming to have a slumber party. 5 has already disappeared, and now another 6 are coming for this weekend to have a slumber party, and they're probably gonna disappear as well. And you get to save them, I guess, by capturing these blackly clad ninja figures, I guess.
That's a good guess. Your guess is as good as mine.
So this game isn't as bad as it sounds. It's an FMV game, and it doesn't look good. It looks really crappy, actually. But it has a funny mechanic. I mean, the whole thing that everything is actually happening in real time. So these 8 video feeds and what's happening there is actually running in real time. I can just switch between them, so I can miss stuff that's happening if I'm not in the right place at the right time. It gives it a longevity, because you need to replay it many times to actually find the right way through. And I mean, the actual gameplay of capturing the intruders is not hard at all. Really, really easy. You press a button when some indicator turns red instead of it goes from green to yellow to red. You press the B button when it's red, and then you capture them. So that's really easy. So the game is about finding that path through the narrative. But it would get kind of boring watching the same story over and over again to finally find out where you need to be at which point in time to capture these guys. So on one hand, I'm intrigued, and I could actually see myself picking this up and trying to play it once or twice until I die or lose, or if there's an end state here somehow. But probably I will never sit down long enough with this to finish it.
Probably a good guess. Now, there are remastered versions of this. And this game also came out on PC back in the day with much better quality video. Still horrid by modern standards, but much better video. And
so I had heard that this was a kind of a risque title, and there was a lot of furore when it came out. But I was kind of disappointed, because I mean, it wasn't really that bad, was it?
It's not. The reason why this game, and we're going to be talking about this in the coming year as the Senate hearings get going on this, and the anti-violence in video game voices get louder. I mean, it's the video. Nobody who is playing video games is really used to digitized imagery in games yet. It's not new, obviously. We had it all the way back, the Journey arcade game or the WWF wrestling game on the C64 that used digitized imagery. It has been done.
Don't forget Samantha
before.
Fox strip poker as well.
Samantha Fox strip poker,
Very
exactly.
important example.
Yes. But those games kind of flew under the radar. Mortal Kombat, which just came out, we just said it was one of the possible games because it's just getting reviewed in the arcade still. That is sort of the bellwether of everybody like, wait a second. This isn't Mario in his 7-pixel high overalls. This is, this looks like a human being. And of course, they're going to cherry pick a couple of scenes from this where, a young woman in her nightgown gets, a thing around her neck as they're pulling her away. And that is going to become the poster child for, ooh, this game is terrible. And what are your children really watching? And of course, video games at this point have no rating system. And so this idea of, is this for mature audiences? Is it not for mature audience? Are video games for adults? And if so, where do we draw those lines? It's a very similar debate to what happened decades earlier with movies, which led to, in the United States, the movie producers creating their own regulations. And in Europe, in Germany, we've talked about it here on the show, they've been putting games on the index since the early 80s. So, bans on games because of violent content is nothing new. It's just, in the United States, for the very first time, this is truly going to become an issue. Now, there have been controversies before, death race, blah, 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 blah. But nothing on this scale, because video gaming has never been as widespread as it will be at this point in time.
Yeah. And I must say, this is a lot more harmless than, say, for example, Mortal Kombat with the Sub-Zero or Scorpion who rips the spine out of people when he does his fatality, for example.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The Sub-Zero thing, or Kano pulling the heart out, that's another one. It's, it's just a different level. And that game was, Mortal Kombat was designed to be controversial.
Yep.
And there's going to be a slew of other games using digitized imagery. Phantasmagoria, I believe, is already being filmed at this point. If it's not just in pre-production, but it's already been teased. We've talked about it on the show. Yep. And they're probably already planning Wing Commander 3. Wing Commander 2 is already out, so Wing Commander 3 is definitely already in pre-production or some stage of production now that EA owns Origin and they can finance it. So that a wave of digitized imagery and gaming is coming. It's coming very, very fast. It's almost like it's coming out of nowhere. Obviously, we had Pit Fighter and stuff before this, but it's going to hit so hard, so fast, and a lot of people are going to suddenly see video games in a completely different light than they saw before. And then, of course, Doom happens. So,
yeah.
But that's another issue entirely. Would you recommend this game to another person?
No, not really. If you're a retro gamer and you're interested, pick it up and try it for 5-10 minutes, see what it is. And as I said, maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment. I would actually like to just, when we're done here, try to play through the story just once to see how I feel and what happens. But I'll never sit down with this long enough to finish it.
That is probably a wise use of your time on this planet. Plus, you got so much Red Dead Redemption still ahead of you. So
Sure.
Okay, before we can turn on the time machine and head back to December of 1992, let's check in with our good friend Ethan to find out what I got wrong in our November 92 episode in a little segment we call the Department of Correction.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan. So,
hi.
Before you tell me everything I got wrong in our November of 1992 episode, we have...
Dale. Oh, my good friend Dale. It is fabulous to finally see you on the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. Everybody else I give crap. But Dale, good friend Dale, I will, you get by with this. And I'm just going to say, when you said the EGG thing, I got you. I got you, Dale. I know exactly what you were getting at.
The egg thing?
You don't, if you didn't get it, you're not going to get it, Carol. So I'm just going to have to pass you by on that one.
Okay, that's an insider joke for you two and somebody else who caught it. Any listeners, if you caught that, send me a message. Okay, so let's get to the corrections.
Yeah, but it's November 92, and there's a couple things. First of all, a cat has entered the room. If you can hear that.
Nope, can't hear it.
Oh, dang. I was gonna make this a 4D experience, but the cat is not coming closer. But first, WMS Industries, they did not at any time own Bally's Total Fitness, because that was the parent company, Bally. They did not buy Bally, they bought a lot of assets from Bally. Bally continued to exist as its own company.
Ah, I did not know. Okay. So, was WMS a subsidiary of Bally?
No. WMS was the holding company that held Williams. They bought the assets of Midway from Bally. And the rights to use the Bally name in amusement products.
Okay, cool. I did not know that, but that is very, very good to know.
Yes. When you see WMS, that's Williams. And then when you see Midway, that's also Williams in this time period. It's weird, it's confusing, makes no sense.
As most things in these corporate mergers and name acquisition nonsenses.
Other names that don't make sense, even though it often gets reported this way, the Shoshinkai Show is not what it's called. The show that Nintendo held in Japan for a long time of exclusive Nintendo products, it was not actually called the Shoshinkai Show, it was called Space World. The reason that people refer to it as the Shoshinkai Show is because the Shoshinkai was the big toy wholesaler in Japan at this time. And they would provide the products to people like the Shoshinkai. So they were the big market of the people who were coming to the event.
Gotcha. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so I just simply assumed because Space World showed up nowhere in the articles that it becomes Space World later on, because I knew that name from our 20 years ago.
As far back as we have records of it, we actually have photos of the banner at the show. It says cool. Space World.
Awesome.
So people get, I think it was a colloquial thing. But the official name of the show was always Space World.
Cool.
Then, Defender 2000 on the Atari Jaguar did in fact come out.
Yeah, I wasn't sure on this one, whether or not it was one of those games that was in development and then got released years later, or if it actually came out during the lifespan of the console.
It did. It did indeed. And of course Tempest 2000 as well, that
was
game.
An earlier title for the system.
Yeah. I think Defender 2000 came out in 95 or something like that. At the very tail end of things.
Well, it wasn't a very long lifespan to begin with, so...
Well, yes, but, that's for you to cover in 1993.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly... I think you're talking about King's Quest, Sierra, all that stuff. All IP of Sierra went to Activision once. Well, they went to Viven. Well, it went to all the companies. But Activision got all the Sierra IP, unless there were things that they sold off at some point. It didn't get scattered to the winds, which I think is what you said. It is mostly consolidated inside Activision.
Yeah, I know there's a bunch of... Not a bunch, but there's a few titles that have gotten away from Activision, like Gold Rush has been remade, I think, twice now by the original creators. Somehow they got those rights back. Leisure Suit Larry series is not being published by Activision nowadays, and somebody else owns the rights. I think it's Activision who did those episodic King's Quest reboots.
They published those.
Yeah. The rest of the IP is dormant. It's kind of
they haven't been doing much with it. They did Tribes a little while ago. It's a Dynamics property. They're not rushing to redo Red Baron or anything like that. But, that's just the cycle of how things go, and especially it's just to get off on a small tangent. It's like at 2000, there's like a cutoff. It's like anything before this is too old to care about. Like if it like aside from like the big franchises and a couple of the things that like started to become big hits in like 1998. That was like the cutoff point where it's just like if it was made before this date, we don't care anymore. It's like all major publishers were just like we're scrubbing our catalog, and then all the minor publishers were like, like Atari was trying to Infogram Atari was trying to remake stuff based on, whatever. I remember there was that remake of Sinistar. That wasn't Atari, but like Sinistar 3D or whatever, and like. So that
Battlezone.
Battlezone was one.
Yeah, the 3D / strategy hybrid Battlezone came out, but it's weird because you'd think that there's at least a lot of these concepts would be really good for handhelds. Incredible Machine alone, that's born for a touchscreen.
Yes, I would. I'd buy that. A remake of Incredible Machine. Yeah, I'd buy that.
We're not going to see.
So there's a whole rant that we could go into about why the industry abandoned all the previous IPs.
Just wait. As soon as they have an AI that can actually take the old games, just play them for an infinite number of hours inside the machine, and then come out with a AI-generated HD remake of the game. I can see it already. Somebody's working on an AI that is just going to pop out an HD remake of the Adventures of Willie
once again,
Beamish.
Carl has gone into the dystopian mode. He has decided to imagine the worst possible futures, but we are going to continue to imagine the worst possible pasts here at the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. That's it for November 1992, and we'll see you later.
As always, thank you for your service, sir.
Bye.
Bye.
So, Carl, you're telling me that you don't have complete control in your brain about all of the Jaguar releases? Can that be true?
This is sadly true. The massive Jaguar library is so monumental that I
all
simply
7
could
titles.
not.
It's not that bad, of course, but
well, it's not that bad. It's not that far from the truth. And unfortunately, I'm a big follower of IndieRetroNews.com.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically my starting page when I log onto my computer every day. I love the website. Big shout out to them. There's a link to them in the show notes every episode because I love that website. And they often cover indie releases for the Jaguar. So a lot of Atari ST titles have been ported and released as cartridges for the Jaguar. Mm-hmm. Which is weird, but makes sense because it has a 68,000 in there and doesn't have the video chips are simple enough that the Atari ST ports will work on there without a problem, unlike the Amiga ports. Yeah. So things like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game, the Atari ST port was ported to the Jaguar. Things like that. Don't know why you'd want to play that, but the option is there, which I respect. I truly do respect that. I mean, more power to them. So this is kind of why some of these older Jaguar games have gotten releases in later years, and I just can't keep track of them sometimes. So.
But yeah. You're excused. It's okay. It's okay.
Thank you.
Gotta say, now that you mentioned the Atari ST, I just have to tell you how I loved the Leonard Tremmel interview. I mean, this guy, he really knew his stuff, didn't he? I had no idea that one of the Tremmel kids were this clued in on the technical side of stuff. He was brilliant and very, very well spoken. I, as a computer scientist, really enjoyed listening to him talk about the Atari ST, for example. So that was a really good interview.
Oh, thank you. And I was so happy that he gave me the time. And he seemed to be enjoying it because originally we had only agreed to an hour. And then we were getting close to it. I was like, is it okay if I ask for more? I said, just keep going. And we just had we actually went on for like another half an hour after that, talking about science and stuff. And Leonard is I love him to death. I was very, very thankful for that. But if you want technical stuff, have you listened to my 2 interviews about the history of Direct3D yet?
Nope, I haven't.
They're up on Patreon, and I know you're a patron. Yep. I talked to the creator of the original creator of Direct3D, and later on we have a debate a discussion with him and an old school developer. Okay, nice. Who he knows was a big proponent of OpenGL back in the day. Okay. And we have that discussion about, what were the differences. I'll be honest with you, there's a huge chunk of those episodes where I am completely out of it because they go deep into the weeds on some of the technical stuff that I don't understand. And that was kind of our agreement. Let's go technical, and I'll just sort of stand back and let it happen. But I'm sure that you would get a lot more out of that than I probably did. But it's still fun stuff.
I've coded my part. Never treat Direct3D because I'm not a Windows kind of guy, but a lot of OpenGL back in the day.
Well, and this is where the debate on the pros and cons of the philosophies underlining both of those APIs. Mm-hmm. And the conclusion at the end is that the OpenGL one had certain limitations by design originally that basically prevented it from evolving over time. Okay. And it's very interesting because it gets into the history of how does OpenGL even come about? What was its origin, not as a gaming API or a real-time processing API in that sense, but as a pre-visualization API for CGI rendered stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
And trust me, highly recommend. This goes for everybody. Those will be out in a couple of months on the regular feed. Remember, everything except for the video versions of the 7 minutes will ultimately be on the feed. But if you want to hear it now, $1 a month will get you there. So that's enough plugging. Before we turn on the time machine, quick caveat. Remember, everybody, when we're talking here about December of 1992, we are talking about magazines and newspapers cover dated December 92, so obviously the news happened at some point before that. It's just a framing device. Don't send me letters. Are you ready to turn on the time machine and head back to December of 1992?
I've never been so ready.
Excellent. That's just because you want to get this over with, right? Okay, let's turn on the time machine.
The SegaCD 1992. Joystick to a whole new world.
Welcome back to December of 1992. Mads, what's our first headline?
So the first headline is that I feel old because when you say 1992, I feel that's not so far away. That was just a couple years ago. But I like the longer jumps. I like when we're in the 80s or 70s because then I can think, that's a long time ago. I need a time machine for that. But why do you need a time machine for 92?
You think this is bad? You need to feel it from my point of view. I'm looking through magazines that I actually owned back in the day. And in some of them, I know I'm going to be running into stuff where ads I answered, people selling used software and stuff. Yeah, so it's weird. Oh, well.
Yeah, well, the first news is Sega teams up with GE.
Sega has signed a deal to license General Electric Aerospace's image processing tech for the application of textures to 3D models, which GE originally developed for flight simulators for the military. The tech would ultimately end up in the Model 2 and Model 3 arcade boards.
So a texture mapping technology, is that it? Or
that's basically it. Now, there may have also been some other stuff, but just looking at the reports that are coming out at this point, and also some of the stuff I found online, where the real 3D technology is connected with all of this. So those 3D accelerators, all of that is coming out of this aerospace flight sim development that GE's been doing over the years. And they figured out how to put textures on stuff for the flight sims, so why not use it here? And that's the big jump between Model 1, which is games like Virtua Fighter, Virtua Racing, and so forth, and Model 2, Virtua Cop, Virtua Fighter 2, where there's texture mapping everywhere.
Yeah.
That's the big difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a good change because, I know some people are nostalgic for those old Model 1 games, but for me, exactly that era of gaming, also what we get on the early PS1 and so on, it's too rough. I love my 2D perfect pixel art. I love my beautiful 3D that comes a bit later on, but this era, it's not I don't enjoy going back to that.
I will admit to having a certain nostalgia for that very, very basic 3D model stuff, just because there was a simplicity to it. Like, I still have Virtua Cop 2, the PC port on my computer, and will fire it up on a fairly regular basis. You just move the mouse around and shoot stuff, and it's just pure, tune out and fall into the Zen mode of, exactly where the bad guys are going to be showing up, exactly what can be blown up, and just trying to hit every single mark.
Witcher Cup I can play as well. I play that I have the light gun for my Saturn, and that's a good game. Yeah, I was thinking of the fighters, for example. It's just it doesn't do anything for me.
Virtua Fighter 1 has probably not aged all that well. I remember the first time I ever saw it, I was with some friends in Hamburg. We were at a train station. We had just gone downtown because we lived in this little town with virtually no CD shops or anything. So we'd go into Hamburg to hit the Virgin Megastore and some other shops. One of my buddies still is really big into death metal. So he'd be looking for this real obscure stuff. And we were on this escalator going down. And I just saw out of the corner of my eye, there was, the typical European gambling arcade and I just happened to see out of the corner of my eye, they had a Virtua Fighter cabinet. And I just saw these polygon humanoid characters jumping around in the demo mode. And I was like, what the fuck was that? And immediately get back on the escalator, go back up, and I'm staring through the window because I'm not 18 yet. I'm not allowed in there. And I'm just staring at this thing. And my friends, two of them knew how to program. They were developing stuff on the side, little RPGs and stuff. And they're like, well, it doesn't look that impressive. I was like, don't you realize what this means? It's human beings in vectors. And it's like, yeah, but 2D art looks better. I was like, don't you understand where this is going? For me, that was like, it's a done deal. We're going to have full 3D environments with every detail imaginable. It's just a matter of processing power. Sorry, it was a revelation to just see that. Now, when I actually ended up playing it, I was not impressed. I was still a Street Fighter kid, but still, yeah. So that being said, one other little, since we're talking about business dealings in the arcades for Sega, news also broke this month that Sega has cut a deal with American Laser Games to bring their Laserdisc titles to the Sega CD. So American Laser Games are the ones who did Mad Dog McCree 1 and 2, Who Shot Johnny Rock, basically these light gun Laserdisc games.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah. And the reason I'm bringing it up is that a month or two ago in our 30-year jump, we talked about how Nintendo supposedly had locked down the license for American Laser games, just the same way they had with The Seventh Guest. And apparently Sega also now has a deal with them. And they will actually bring their games to the Sega CD.
Okay. Yep.
So this is just an interesting one. So either the reports were wrong about the exclusivity of American Laser Games deal with Nintendo, or they've realized, wait, we actually do need to get revenue from these and get them out. Something has happened there, but, Sega will get these games.
Yeah. Definitely Mad Dog McCree is on the Sega CD, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, next piece of news is that Accelerama coming to a mall near you.
Edison Brothers, the mall developer we have mentioned many times here on the show, has unveiled their latest concept family entertainment center, the Accelerama. Designed to be a mall anchor, the facilities will include a play area for kids, virtuality machines, laser tag, a small roller coaster, and of course, lots of video games. The first one will open in New Jersey, with St. Louis and North Carolina to follow.
So did you ever get into an Accelerama from your time in the States?
No. I don't know how long these things were around. I put a link. Arcadepreservation.fandom.com is a website that tries to keep track of this stuff. And they last for a while in some form. How much was in each one of these, I have no idea. But no, there was never one near me.
Okay.
But we just talked a month or two ago about how Edison Brothers had also teamed up with Spectrum Holobyte, and they were going to do the virtual Star Trek experiences also in malls.
Okay.
And so it's just this idea that, we're going to do the arcade and we're going to do it bigger and better and all this stuff, just as the big technology like CD and stuff is all coming to the home. So, yeah, it's nice ideas. I would have loved to see one back in the day, but yeah, they're going to become harder and harder to finance, especially in malls.
Yeah. Okay, but what we do get in malls, I guess, is here. Redemption is on the rise.
We've discussed the surge in redemption coin-op games many times, but at the latest AMOA show, over 50 companies were showing redemption machines. The surge in this kind of game, which seldom relies on the latest tech or goes out of style within weeks of being put on location, is finding more and more willing operators.
Redemption machines. The bane of video games.
Yeah, so for listeners who don't know what we're talking about, redemption machines are those machines where you play a game and it gives you tickets, and then you can redeem those tickets for some little prize, like a rubber ball or whatever.
Yeah, and most of the time they're not video games, they're like basketball games or, so mechanical stuff that has some triggers and sensors that you can trigger, and then it'll count and you get some points and then some tickets based on the points, of course.
Exactly. And these games are becoming more and more popular because, A, video games in the arcades are just get boring way too fast. The competition from home systems is just way too high. The gimmicky arcade games that, have full-blown driving setups or, have like 3 screens and 6 controllers or whatever, cost a small fortune. And so the risk is too high. But these things, little kids love them. You can put it there, and they don't care if the whack-a-mole game is 10 years old or 5 years old. As long as it works, it's whack-a-mole. They're having a good time.
Yep. And what would always happen is that the heads of these molds would just be metal because the paint would be torn off after a while.
Yeah, or even better,
spooky, actually.
Rubbery, and the rubber just starts wearing off. And
yeah. Now, I was in the States in the very late 90s, and I remember being so disappointed whenever we go to a big arcade, it would always be full of these redemption machines, and then there'd be like 6 or 4 Daytona USA machines hooked up, and maybe 2 regular arcade cabinets. So, I hated it.
Yeah, I mean, especially, when were you there? 98, 99?
Yeah. 98, I guess.
Yeah. Again, I got some interviews. I still have to edit them. The guys who ran, the owner and the general manager of the Family Entertainment Center I used to work at back in 95. And yeah, that's about the time that they got out of the business.
Yeah.
After being in it for 15 years, they got in the mid 80s. So the problem is that coin-op video games just weren't bringing in the money that they used to, because, I mean, why are you going to pay money in the arcade for a side-scrolling beat-em-up? You've got that at home.
Yeah.
You need to have something that stands out, and the pictures on the screen alone weren't going to do it anymore.
No, the arcade stopped having that edge about the late 90s, mid 90s actually, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the 3D modeled stuff is going to give them a slight edge for a little while.
Yep.
So, I mean, you get the Model 2 games are going to come out before the PlayStation hits. So it's like, you can play, your 2D fighter at home, or you can come here and play the 3D stuff with full textures, and it looked like a different world. Daytona comes out, before you can play anything like it at the home. In the home, that's cool. Or you can play, 4 players at the same time against one another in cabinets. That's kind of cool too.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything else.
Yeah, and speaking of how the home gaming scene actually hurts the arcade at this point in time, SNES Street Fighter hits coin drop.
Some operators are reporting that the earnings from the Street Fighter II cabinets have significantly dropped after the release of the SNES port of Street Fighter II.
Which makes complete sense, as that is apparently a really, really good version of that game.
It is a very good version of that game. It's obviously not arcade perfect, but it's a very, very good version. And this is just anecdotal. And also this month in the Coin Trade magazines, the Hyper Fighting edition of Street Fighter II is being promoted in a big way. It's an add-on board or a mod board. I'm not going to get into the details. I don't know if it's an add-on board or if it's just a chip mod, or you switch out the chips. I don't know. But basically, upgrade your arcade cabinet to the latest version of Street Fighter II Hyper Fighting Edition. And they're doing this specifically because the coin drop isn't staying high. The operators are buying these illegal mods to speed up the game to increase the challenge. But, people can play it at home now. So that's going to impact those results. Now, granted, other games are coming. Like we said, Mortal Kombat's out there. That's going to be the next big thing in the arcades.
Yeah.
And then it's a question of, you have to keep new games coming, but those new games cost quite a chunk of change.
Yeah. That's how it is. So going home to the home consoles instead, SegaCD launches.
On October 15th, 1992, Sega officially launched the SegaCD in a press event in New York. While the U.S. press got its first official look at the system, Sega also announced the introduction of a RAM cart that would allow for the saving of a greater number of save states and more complex ones. The cart was already out in Japan and was retailing for about $50. The US launch would be 60.
So I've actually never seen that RAM card for the Sega. So
It's
that was
not
to be used in conjunction with the Sega CD only, or?
Yeah, so the Sega CD already had some RAM in it that you could store save games to.
Mm-hmm.
But if you wanted to store more save games, or if you wanted to store maybe in some RPGs a more complex save game than you had space for, then this would be the option.
Okay, so kind of like the memory card for a PS1 already.
Exactly. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if this is the first one of its kind, but I believe it's the first one of its kind for a US-based system.
Yeah. I can't remember any earlier ones, at least. Interesting.
Yeah, very. Now, I don't know of any games that actually required it, because I think that they all made sure that it would fit in the normal internal memory.
Okay.
And so since you had the internal memory, you didn't really need it. The PlayStation didn't have any internal memory for it, so you needed the memory card.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, you could say that you could sell it to people who want to take the save games to other people's Sega CD, for example, so it wasn't tied to the console.
That's true as well. I mean, as long as you knew another person who had bought into the Sega CD.
I didn't know anybody back in the day who had that, but I have one now, and I like it.
Well, I mean, it's got some really great titles. I actually spent quite a bit of time a couple years ago, granted through an emulator, playing Snatcher on it. And
so I've never played that. I want to play that at some point.
It's a visual novel.
Yeah.
So I
like those.
I mean, I have yet to find anything in the game where I really felt like I was playing a game. It's more just, I'm going through this story. Same thing with Cobra, but I was a big fan of the cartoon as a kid. So
I was a huge fan of Another World, or Out of This World in the US on the Amiga. So my main reason for getting a Sega CD was Heart of the Alien. And that is actually a beauty of a game. I love it.
And I've heard very good things about the visuals on it.
It's hard,
I have my I have my criticisms of the gameplay of Out of This World. Lots and lots and lots.
If I can recall correctly, it's a lot harder than Another World, but it's doable. I finished it at least. So.
Yeah, Another World was always just a frustration fest for me on the Amiga.
Really?
I
love that game.
It was just, I love the animation. I love the idea of it. It's just after getting killed for the 10th time because I just barely missed a jump or something.
So as the kids these days say, Carl, you just need to get good.
No. The designers need to have more respect for my time on this planet.
Perhaps.
All I have to say, I was an old make my games easy gamer back before it was cool.
Okay.
Or something. I don't know. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. I've watched a playthrough of it because I wanted to see all the cool animation, and I love Flashback. Flashback is the game.
Flashback is really good as well, yeah.
But Flashback put everything on a grid. That's what that game needed. That way you didn't have that pixel perfect jumping. You knew you were on a grid. You were always moving one step at a time in Flashback.
It wasn't so bad in Another World. It
was terrible.
Another World has one section. You're on the ground and some water is rising quite fast. So you need to get away from there quickly. That's the hard part. Apart from that,
I never got past that part.
There's some fights right after that part. That is quite hard as well. But there's 2 or 3 places where you can get stuck. Apart from that, it's just a beautiful cinematic experience.
I'm sorry, just alone those stupid little worms at the beginning. I'm sorry, but trying to figure out, where to jump and how to jump, it was just, it felt too random. But then again, I had a similar problem with Prince of Persia.
Carl, I could agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong. So let's just move on.
Yeah, okay, let's move on.
I love Prince of Persia as well. Don't say anything bad about that.
No, see, for me, my favorite game in that whole genre, if you will, and this is going to be a very hot take, a controversial one, is Blackthorn.
Oh, I really like Blackthorn as well, but
Yeah.
Prince of Persia and Another World are two almost perfect games in my book. Prince of Persia has one thing that always annoyed me a little bit, and that's the 1 hour time limit. Because it's a hard game to finish within that 1 hour time limit. So why punish me for taking my time and trying to get the fights right? I don't get that part. But apart from that, it's a brilliant game.
You can read Jordan Mechner's diaries.
Oh, I have it here on my shelf, but I've never had time to read it. But I need to read it at some point.
The thought process that goes into that time limit is interesting. That's all I'm going to say about it. It's very interesting to see how his thoughts about that evolve as he's developing the game.
Okay.
So,
got a nice hardcover edition of that book over here, but I've never found the time to read it, so I need to do that at some point.
Yeah, I haven't read the whole thing, but there were a few bits and pieces that I looked up to because I was interested in what was going on there. So, okay, but moving on.
Yes, Nintendo and Sony make up.
Nintendo released a press release just as the Sega CD launched, claiming that they had made up with Sony and that Sony-based SNES console, which will take both CDs and carts, will be compatible with Nintendo CD-ROM add-on. Both systems will play the same software, so apparently include the 32-bit add-on chip Nintendo announced, but the Super NES drive will also be able to play CDI titles. The current release date for the $200 add-on is August of 1993. Oh, and they are looking for licensees in case anyone is interested.
So we all know that, well, at least if you're interested in the retro scene, that only like 3 or 4 of these SNESs with CD-ROM drives actually ever gets produced. And they are really expensive these days if you want to get your hands on one of them. But
But you have to differentiate. Those are not the Nintendo ones. Those are the Sony ones.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about. What are the Nintendo ones? I've never even heard about that.
Oh, you haven't been listening to the episodes and my discussions with Ethan on this. Okay.
No, I'm way behind these days.
Okay, so for those coming in late, Sony and Nintendo originally announced a partnership where they're going to be producing the Sony PlayStation, which is going to be a Super Nintendo that also plays CDs. That's the idea. I'm simplifying, but yes. Then Nintendo has an about face, announces basically at the same show that the Sony is announcing their player that Nintendo has now made cut a deal with Philips to make a CD drive, and it's basically all smoke and mirrors. I think Nintendo gets cold feet in the whole thing. Number one, they don't want Sony to have so much control because Sony would be producing the device on their own.
Yep.
They get cold feet. Then they go with Philips. Philips, I personally, they probably looked into it. Maybe internally, is this a good idea? What I really think is the Genesis selling as well as it did in the States and eating up NES market share spooked Nintendo. They've been postponing the Super Nintendo because of the success of the NES. And they didn't really think they were assailable by Sega. They found out they were assailable. Then Sega is announcing the SegaCD, and they're not sure if this is really going to eat away at even more of their market share. So they keep coming up with these announcements. This has been going on for over a year now. They keep coming up with these announcements about how great their CD player is. And they keep coming up with these announcements just as Sega's launching something or announcing something, or right before Christmas, they're putting out these press releases saying, ours is so much better. And first it was, it's going to be cheaper. Then we're going to have a 16-bit is just not good enough. We're going to launch it with 32-bit extra super RISC chip in there. And they announced this at the same time that they're showing off, Star Fox and so on and so forth. so that, or they're talking about the Super FX chip, sorry, just to be clear.
Yeah.
And it's basically, they're just pulling nonsense out of their butt to hopefully stall people from buying the Sega CD and wait for the Super NES one.
Yeah.
Which is clearly not coming because a 32-bit one that also plays CDI titles, the CDI tech would require a completely different architecture, everything. You're not going to put what's in the CDI in this $200 device. It's just
it
not
looks good
possible.
on paper. So
It's something that you can sell to the kiddies, and in the hopes of, parents who just shelled out for a 16-bit system after spending hundreds and hundreds on software for the NES. Giving them an excuse not to buy a new piece of hardware is great. And that excuse is, well, let's wait and see what Nintendo does first.
You got to remember, it won't have any blast processing.
Well, blast processing hasn't happened yet. We don't have the phrase blast processing yet.
It's on the horizon. Coming. It's quite soon, actually. 93 is going to be a fun year. Yeah.
Because,
Yeah. Sorry?
Because the bit wars are on, baby.
Yep. But now we already say move over bit wars. The mech wars are here.
With Street Fighter II breaking the 16 megabit cart barrier for home systems. Sorry, Neo Geo. You're not really a home system. You're in a different league. Japanese gamers are heading towards a new slew of 12 and 16 meg games. Fighting games like Rushing Beat 2 and Streets of Rage 2 will be joined by RPG giants like Dragon's Quest V and Final Fantasy V.
Yeah. Great games there.
Yeah, and these much bigger carts are going to allow a lot more artwork, a lot more sound, a lot more spectacle, which, it's kind of weird, just as, there's 640 megabytes of data over on this CD. But, on the cart, you can do a lot more effectively.
Yes.
Because you can access
early
everything.
CDs had random access speeds that were atrocious. So
yeah, they're single speed. And so what you're really limited to is what can you put in RAM?
Yeah,
unless you're streaming video. And so, these larger cartridges are really going to make a difference for games.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be interesting to see. It's retrospective, so we already know how all this turns out. But at this point in time, a lot of people are like, how big can these games get? At what point does the cost become a problem? The Neo Geo just broke the 100 megabit barrier. They're in a league of their own, but they're arcade games, really. So
yeah, these days we have 100 gigabyte games.
Oh, geez, it's gigabytes. Oh, my God. It's crazy. It's absolutely insane.
Yes, it is. So, staying in Japan, EA is turning Japanese.
Electronic Arts has announced a joint venture with Japan's JVC to form Electronic Arts Victor, a developer/publisher of games in Japan. The JVC portion of the company will be owned by JVC's Victor Entertainment subsidiary, while Famicom, Super Famicom, and Mega Drive games for the Japanese market will be developed by the new company. Its main focus will be on the localization of EA titles for the Japanese market. EA will end up buying JVC's 35% stake in 1997 and then subsequently forming a new partnership with Square.
I don't think I've ever heard the Electronic Arts Victor label before.
That's because this is really for Japanese releases.
Yeah.
So I put a link, and remember, everybody, everything we talk about, all the sources, everything's in the show notes. But I put a link to the Moby Games entry, and there's a bunch of titles I've never heard of because they were just Japan onlys. But most of the stuff is just localizations of EA titles. A lot of PC stuff as well is in there.
Okay. So getting back to the Sega CD, virtual VCR is coming to Sega CD.
Digital Pictures, the company responsible for Sewer Shark and Night Trap, has announced Virtual VCR, a series of CDs for the Sega CD using their video compression tech that will let users stream video programming to their TVs. The first announced products are a series of Warner Brothers cartoons, but more could be in store.
So these are simply video CDs, that's all, right? So video compressed onto CD and played in horrible quality on the Sega CD.
Well, and this is the thing. The screenshot that's showing up in Electronic Gaming Monthly shows a video window that's still not full screen, but is definitely better than the Night Trap one. Yeah. Which I'm guessing has to do with the fact that in Night Trap they needed to be able to switch in real time basically from one video feed to the other. So there's probably some kind of trickery going on there about where the video is located on the disc and so forth. Mm. So this, they have a little bit more room to work with. Now, so the idea here is you buy this disc and it's like buying a VHS tape that has a bunch of stuff on it. Now, the Warner Brothers
how much would a bunch of stuff? It says 65 minutes. That's what it can actually have on a CD.
Yeah.
So you couldn't even do a full video. I mean, a full movie.
No, you can't do a full movie. Okay. But then again, I mean, video disc couldn't do a full movie on one disc. Nope. It was always 2 discs.
Yeah, true.
So, I mean, and considering the tech in the Sega CD is nowhere near what you needed for a video disc decoder, you can argue that it's not that bad. But, the Warner Brothers deal never comes about, at least for the cartoons. And as far as I can tell, they only release one disc. And it's just a series of music videos from bands signed by the Warner Music label.
Okay.
And there's a link to it that I'll put in the show notes. Somebody has uploaded at least one of those videos, and it's Mr. Big's Wake Up Little Girl. Mm. And it's, the video quality is not great.
Yeah. So just doing some math here. It says 65 minutes on a CD, so you'd have about 1 megabyte per minute, badly compressed. Compared to a DVD, for example, that's about 1 megabyte, a bit more actually. It's 10 megabit per second, I think, and for DVD quality. This is way below it, and I guess before proper MPEG compression was. That DVD is MPEG 2, I believe. So.
Yeah, DVD is MPEG 2. Now, that standard already exists. What you don't have in the Sega CD is the processing power to do that. And you also have to remember the limitations of the video hardware in the Sega CD, because you're still limited to that 64 colors on screen from a palette of 256 that the Genesis can produce.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
So even if let's say you had the raw power for MPEG, downgrading it and figuring out how to process it in those colors would be beyond what the video chip can do.
Why would anybody ever want to buy this instead of a 2-hour VHS tape?
Because it's new?
Yeah, perhaps.
I mean, remember, this is the first time that you have a product other than Laserdisc and the old vinyl video discs from back in the day, where you can, choose which part of the thing to launch at any given time.
Yep.
And, it's more of a novelty, I think, than anything else.
Okay.
But, yeah. Okay. I mean, come on. They did the same thing 15 years later with cartoons compressed down and put on cartridges for sale for the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, that always confused me as well.
Yeah, I mean, but the idea simply was you got this device, especially with cartoons, if you can sell it to the kids, as here's another thing to do with the machine, why not?
So the first time this actually made sense was with the PlayStation Portable with their UMD drives and movies you could watch in reasonable quality while you were on the train, for example.
Exactly. And it's, if you can play it, why not? But this is just, people are hoping that this tech can do more than it can.
Yeah.
And when this is the oldest story in consumer electronics, especially consumer computing power, it's always, in theory it could do a version of this. Until it can actually do it well, it's not really going to take off. Just, anybody who bought, we talked about this with Voucher last time. If you buy a Diamond Rio MP3 player that only has 20 megs of RAM in it or 30 megs of RAM in it,
yep,
you have a limited usability for a very expensive device. Okay, but
true. Moving on and moving back to Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 comes to the NES.
Sorta. A Taiwanese Famicom bootleg of Street Fighter 2 called Master Fighter has surfaced. It isn't a perfect port by no means legit, but still an interesting sign of how alive the NES market still was at this time and in certain parts of the world.
Yeah. NES games are produced a long time. And we even get some very, very late C64 titles at this point in time. So.
Oh, yeah, C64 is still alive. I mean, we're still going to have C64 magazines going into late 94.
Yeah, impressive.
In the UK, at least.
Yeah. I was well on to my Amiga at that point in time, so... Oh, well. So let's go to some... I guess this is now the computer news.
Now we're going straight into PC news,
Yes.
done with those console stuff.
Yes. Intel introduces new interrupt architecture.
Intel has shown off their new interrupt controller chip, the 82489DX. Oh yeah, Intel with their great naming. This chip supersedes the 8259A chip, which has been in use since 1978 and is in virtually every PC compatible. The original chip had no support for multitasking, but software could trick it into allowing a semblance of multitasking, as was implemented in Windows 3.1. The new architecture will allow for multitasking natively if supported by software and automatically assign tasks to processor cores not currently in use or those that are being the least strained.
That sounds kind of incredible for 92 to get that already,
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, they're announcing it now. I'm not sure which chips get it first. I think there's still one 486 chip that gets it, but the Pentium chips will be the ones that have it.
Okay.
And this chip, or this family of chips, is still in active production to this very day. It keeps being evolved. Evolved. Put a link to it in the show notes. Now, this is what's going to allow, and this was the big argument of Amiga users back in the day, PCs aren't really multitasking systems.
No.
This is what makes the PC a true multitasking monster. And also, and we've been talking about the whole idea, the rise of multi-core processing. We had a story a couple of months ago about how Russian programmers are being brought over because they're trained in multi-core because it was a necessity for them. But multi-core, everybody knows that's the future. That is the way computing has to go. And this is going to allow the Wintel architecture to play a role in that. And just as a side, everybody knows the PowerPC is coming. Apple has already announced that they're going to be shifting everything over to this upcoming new chipset that's being developed with the help of IBM and Apple, and I can't remember who else was involved. That is also going to have something similar to this.
Yes. Yeah. The PowerPC was a powerhouse. That was an incredible CPU back in the day.
Exactly. But you know what? As long as Intel keeps up, it's basically not going to be able to stand a chance. Now, interesting side note here. We've talked a little bit about this on the show in previous jumps, especially the 40 and 50 year jumps, 40 years at least, that AMD is able to produce Intel compatible chips because of an old licensing agreement that they had with Intel to become a second source for Intel chips. Now, this new controller chip is not part of that deal. Okay. In theory, Intel could now basically push AMD out of the market if if the software requires this interrupt controller, that would be the end of that. And both Cyrix and AMD tried to create their own alternate standards. They both fail. Cyrix obviously dies completely because Quake wipes them out, as we'll get to in a couple of years. But AMD ends up having to license Intel's design, and they're still doing that to this day. Okay. So every time you buy an AMD chip, you're actually paying a little bit of money to Intel for this chip design and standard.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So this next piece of news makes me sad. I hate to see stuff to drop away from the Amiga, but Infogrames drops the Amiga.
French development powerhouse Infogrames has announced that it will no longer support the Amiga as a platform. With new technology pushing titles like Alone in the Dark, apparently Commodore's system is no longer worth porting to.
Yeah. So I played Alone in the Dark a lot. I love that game. Playing it seems like something that could chug along on an Amiga. Just slightly slower, couldn't it?
No. Number one, Alone in the Dark has some texturing in the 3D.
Yes, it does.
The amount of memory that you would need for the background imagery alone, especially when you think about how the Amiga processes video on that scan line by line basis, it would be a nightmare. You would have had to reprogram it, and you would have had, on a standard A500, forget about it. That's never going to happen. On an Amiga 1200, that is basically just good enough to get Wing Commander 1 working. No, it would be a slideshow.
Yeah.
And then also remember, the standard A1200 doesn't have a hard drive in it. Or does it? Did the 1200s come standard with a hard drive?
So I never had a 1200 back in the day. The one I have today has a hard drive. I think the 1200 had hard drives, didn't they?
I don't know. If they did, it was
from
only
the 600
a 20
line.
megger.
They started introducing that you could choose a version with a hard drive or not. But I'm guessing the 1200 had it.
That is an excellent question. I'm pulling up the Wikipedia right now. Had 2 megs of memory.
Yes.
Which also probably would have been a problem to get that game up and running.
Could get the graphics running, I guess.
Yeah. Let's see. Hard drive. Yeah, including an option for an internal 2.5-inch hard disk drive. Yeah, so out of the gate, it did not ship with a... so you couldn't assume that there was a hard drive in it.
No, okay.
And yeah, so this is why it's just... and it's kind of sad because there's a bunch of articles in different magazines this month about the revealing of the 1200, which we covered last month already. But, companies like Ocean are promising a lot of support. Gremlin Graphics is promising a lot of support. But outside of the UK, it's basically just crickets.
Yeah.
And it's mainly because the UK market is still holding on. And then you add the piracy to it. And, what's the return on investment of producing this port? Yeah, so...
Yeah, makes sense.
Now, if you did a demake of it, and you made it maybe with sprite scaling, that would be cool. But yeah.
Oh, next piece of sad news is that Shera moves Amiga port development to Europe.
Well, it's not really sad. This was
the end of days, isn't
sign. It is the end of days, but
yes.
But then again, if you played a Sierra Amiga port of the previous 5 years, any news that somebody competent might be doing that was good news.
True.
After rumors that Sierra would not be bringing any more of its games to Commodore's flagship system, which we talked about last month, the point-and-click powerhouse has announced that Amiga ports would continue, but handled by European devs due to their innovative, that's their words, development techniques.
Okay. So, which games do we get that are from European developers?
King's Quest VI.
Okay.
And it's not just any dev. It's Revolution Software's going to develop it.
They were definitely good at it, though. So,
yeah, they had already gotten a couple games under their belt. Lure of the Temptress, and can't remember what their second title was. It's before Broken Sword, but...
No, I think this is probably... They've only done Lure of the Temptress at this point.
Yeah, at this point...
The second title is Beneath the Steel Sky, and that's got to be 93 or 94.
Yeah, so Beneath the Steel Sky is in development at this point. And they're going to take the art assets of King's Quest VI and instead of just using the Sierra engine, which is what they've been doing so far, they're just going to reprogram the entire thing from scratch for the Amiga using the art assets.
Yeah.
And it is going to get really good reviews. Even Amiga Power gave it a decent score. The problem is the market is too small. It comes out too late. On a standard A500 with all the artwork, it just takes forever to play the game. You need a hard drive to play it decently. And so, yeah, it ends up being the last game Sierra releases for the Amiga. And Revolution Software will then go on and just be doing their own games.
Yes.
But, yeah.
So one of the original founders of Revolution Software kickstarted a book about Revolution recently, a couple of months ago. I backed that, so that should be in the post soon.
Revolution Software is an interesting case of a company keeping a genre alive way past its mainstream commercial life, but largely... And I'd be interested to see if you do get a copy of it. I want to know how much he goes into the business model side of things as opposed to just the game dev, because that's really not important. What's important here is, and this is my theory on Revolution, or at least it's just from what I've observed, they've Jeff Smithed it. And I hope I'm getting the guy's name right. Have you ever read the Bone comics?
Yes.
Okay.
That's Jeff Smith,
the guy who created that, Jeff Smith. I actually got to see him give a speech about comic creation at the University of Florida years ago, and then I asked him, I asked him about something else entirely, but. He talked about the business model of the Bone comic, or at least how he sold it to his wife was, I'm going to give up my full-time job as an animator that's bringing in a solid income to sit and start making this independent comic, but it's not going to be a waste of time because I will continuously be paid for every single page I get for forever.
Okay.
Normally with comics, it's a one and done. It's on the shelf. You might get a collected edition at some point, but nobody's counting on really getting paid a second time for those pages. And his idea from the get-go was it's designed to be this book that's on the shelf that you can always buy. And I get that feeling from the Revolution Software games that they're playing a long game by... being like, we want to get paid for the same game over and over again. Make them things that are not flashy in the technological sense, but they're designed that people 10 years later can still pick up the game and get into the series no matter what.
And they're very good at keeping the games playable on modern platforms as well. Broken Sword all of the games, I guess. At least the first two were released on iPad, for example, and
Game Boy Advance.
Yeah,
Come on,
ported to everything. So yeah. True.
Yeah, that's. I'd like to see if he discusses that aspect of the business model, because I get this gut feeling when I look at Revolution that that's the game they're playing, and I freaking love it. That's a brilliant game to play, and it also makes sense with a genre that's essentially, from a game mechanic standpoint, stuck in like 1989.
Yeah,
that hasn't really evolved since then. And it doesn't have to evolve.
It doesn't need to, because it is the best genre. So there's no discussion there, Carl.
I love my point-and-click adventures more than almost anybody else, but even I am going to admit that genre has some very serious warts and boils and other problems that prevent it, for a reason, from becoming a truly mainstream genre in a world where video games are truly mass market.
But
that's
days,
another issue.
There are so many point-and-click adventure games. They're just not labeled as that anymore. I mean, they are interactive stories where you need to figure out small puzzles to just advance what is really just a TV series you're watching and going through the motions with. My kids love playing Life is Strange, for example, and all sorts of games like that, which is very much just the natural progression of point and clicks, I guess.
I know they are a natural progression, but that's not what Revolution produces, is it?
No, that's true. That's true. I love that game still. I mean, the new Beyond the Steel Sky was brilliant.
Yeah, but see, they're in this very specific niche.
Yeah, true.
That hasn't evolved. And I think that, again, if you get the book, I'd love to hear if he does address the business model aspect of it, because that's one of those things. Well, as soon as it comes out, he'll probably do the rounds. I'll see if I can get an interview at that point.
Yeah,
because that's how I got Ken Williams. So
yeah,
because he had rejected my request multiple times until he had to promote a book. So
Cecil is sometimes available on the Sausage Factory. If you ever listen to that podcast, it's a very, very good podcast.
I haven't listened to that.
No, well, Chris O'Regan, old Retro Asylum host, he's been doing a podcast called The Sausage Factory. He's done more than 400 episodes now. He does a new one every week, and has been doing it for a long time. And it interviews developers, mainly indie developers, and about their process, about their products, everything he wants to talk to the developers about. And he interviewed Charles Cecil as well. So,
cool. That would be interesting to hear. Yeah, I mean, again, creative process is something that I find fascinating, but I try to avoid it here on the show because this is not the focus of what we're doing here.
True.
Since we're on Sierra, one more quick tidbit. Wasn't worth a headline, but it was interesting. Sierra has also forced Virgin Games to clarify that their new title, The Legend of Corandia, is not related to King's Quest. This is due to a blurb on the box claiming that if someone likes King's Quest, they would love Legend of Corandia.
So I seem to remember that blurb being there when I bought Legend of Corandia, which is a Westwood game, by the way. Published by Virgin. So they didn't take it away, at least.
No, they didn't take it away, but they added a sticker. And they added a sticker with the clarification on the packaging that and even taken an ad out in Computer Gaming World. So that's a link in the show notes. But yeah, my box copy of the game for the Amiga also had that sticker on it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Great
Fun
game,
stuff.
but a very, very annoying forest maze at some point, if I recall correctly.
Mazes and point-and-click adventures are just wrong.
Just don't do it.
Then again,
it's done really well in Monkey Island, if you ask me, The Secret of Monkey Island. But that's the only one I like, because you get the solution. That's part of the fun, figuring out that you actually have a piece of paper showing you the solution.
That's true. That was more of a parody of them. So
yeah, exactly. So shareware gets more respect.
Computer Gaming World magazine has started a regular column, Best of the Rest, which will be dedicated to reviewing shareware titles. The success of Wolfenstein 3D has sparked the move, as the quality of some of the software distributed this way is clearly capable of competing with whatever else is out there.
Yeah. I remember the whole shareware thing. For me, it really started in 93. Something along those lines, at least. You got shareware releases on magazines, on discs or CDs later on, and yeah, that was huge for a while.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's going to die out after a certain amount of time. On demos that you could download online are basically going to supplant it.
Yes,
but Duke Nukem 3D is a huge shareware release. Mm-hmm. And after that, I can't really think of too many big ones. I'm sure there were a few still, but I can't think of them. But yeah, Wolfenstein 3D is just changes all the metrics, changes all of the expectations. And, they started a column. I don't know how long it lasts, but they started a column for it. So that's just a new way of getting something that is potentially quality software.
Yeah. And on to a veritable feast of acronyms. ESPN sues EA over EASN. You want me to say that again?
I love writing that stuff. I love writing that stuff. So, Electronic Arts has been sued by cable sports station ESPN over EA's Electronic Arts Sports Network brand and logo. The EASN, that's EA's Sports Network, branding has been used by EA on its sports games to unify them as one brand and to highlight their use of TV-like presentation. ESPN feels it is a bit too close to their own logo and has asked a court to put an end to EASN. EA will stop using the logo in 1993.
So, did they actually choose that logo, you think, to gain something because it looked like the ESPN logo?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, it is not a coincidence. I mean, it's not a network. It's not like, the moderators that show up.
It's a funny name to choose for something that's just branding for the sports games, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's to highlight the fact that looks like TV. I mean, you also have to remember that the TV sports line from CinemaWare was fairly popular, especially among the sports heads.
Yep.
The guy who is brought in to do the console version of Madden before this had just worked on ABC Monday Night Football, which was a football game for computers licensed off of the TV broadcast with, pictures and digitized speech from the moderator of the show. It made it look like the TV show as much as you could on a C64, for example. So this idea was in the air that your sports games could look and feel like if you were watching it on TV.
Yeah.
And so that's the imagery they're going for. And the best known logo, the best known brand for that is ESPN.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the two logos, and all they needed to change really was they got this line, this through line, the ESPN logo through all four letters. That's just white out instead of the black. EA did the same on the E, so if they hadn't done that, it would have been okay, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, EA's logo up until that point didn't have anything like that. I mean, EA was still, the square, the circle, and the triangle.
And so
I
see why they why this isn't good. Wouldn't hold up in court, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, the EA logo with that, the white separation of the top line of the E from the rest of the E is still part of their logo today, the EA logo. But yeah, this is where it originally comes from. And, they'll just call it EA Sports after this. They're going to drop the network part.
Yes. Makes sense. Okay. On to a category I don't know what is, but...
this is online.
Okay. So Bell Atlantic moves to test streaming video.
In a sign of the coming information age revolution, Bell Atlantic has requested FCC approval for a test of video-on-demand services via ASDL lines. Through the system, phone company employees would be able to choose video from a list of those available on a video server, and the videos would play on their home devices via a decoder box.
So I know what an ADSL line is. Is that what you mean, or is this something called?
Okay. that's a typo. ADSL.
Yes, ADSL lines. So ADSL lines in '92 already. That's early.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, and this is a test run. So just to give a little bit of background, and Dale would be able to give here a better background on this. So in the late '70s, we had the U.S. phone company was one monopoly phone company. Not started by the government like most of the phone networks in Europe, but it was a private company. Mm-hmm. And there was all these concerns about, too much power. What happens now that the telephone lines are going to be used for things like data? That was already a concern in the 70s. Because in the States, you already had the first dial-up systems, but it had all these other implications. Businesses were moving back and forth. Wall Street was moving everything digital. And so they break up the phone company for a multitude of reasons into the so-called baby bells, because it was originally the Bell Phone Company. The baby bells were these now regional monopolies, but they were all, separate from one another. The long-distance phone business was opened up to more competition, and the question was going to be, what about these data services? Are they also going to be in control of these baby bells? If we allow the baby bells to get into data services, will that stifle competition? Will other companies not be able to get in because the baby bells, as owners of the infrastructure, will have such a market advantage that nobody else will be able to get in? So the idea of them getting this permission from the Federal Communications Commission to even try this demo out, and it's only going to some of their employees at first, is because everybody's afraid that if you let them do anything other than telephone communication, they're automatically going to become a monopoly because nobody else will ever be able to compete with them.
Okay.
Yeah. And so here, it's video on demand using truly compressed video. How good it is, we have no idea. I have no way of judging that. Maybe it's SegaCD quality. Maybe it's not. Who knows?
Yeah, okay.
But, yeah.
Early talk of ADSL lines, but I do remember the ISDN lines, which we had back in this at this time. Companies had back in this time, was actually released way earlier, but just never really rolled out so that anybody could access them.
Yeah. And this is one of those things where, the question was, why would you have the ISDN line? What would be the purpose of it? And this is another little side note. In Replay Magazine, that's one of the big journals or magazines for the coin-op operators. So it's Insider Magazine. They have a great quote because the coin-op people are very, very worried about all this. And if you've used a jukebox in the last 20 years, they're mostly just these boxes hanging on the wall with an internet connection. Yeah. And, they've got maybe a few hundred songs downloaded, but there's this whole extra library that you can pay extra for. Like, you might be able to play a song for $0.25, or you can pay 35 cents and it'll download a song out of this larger library and play it.
Okay.
And the coin-op operators are really worried because there's no moving parts. You don't have to constantly feed it new physical discs. What's going to stop the restaurant owner from just buying one of these devices, hanging it up, and never having to call the coin-op operator again?
Yeah. That makes sense.
So, and they were also worried that this video-on-demand technology would also be able to be used for computer stuff. Because, I mean, ultimately, could you just play Mad Dog McCree through this ADSL line, never needing to have the physical machine that the operator is getting the 50% share from? And these are all the worries that they're having. But they have this great line in here, which is very foreshadowing of what's coming, that in response to this whole Baby Bell's getting the right to do this streaming, that Bill Clinton and Al Gore, the newly elected president and vice president, have, quote, called for a high-tech data network going to every U.S. home and business, end quote. And this is their suggestion of opening up the internet. Al Gore will then later on get made fun of for, he jokingly claimed he gave birth to the internet, or he invented the internet. But he's the one who introduces the legislation that opens up the internet. That's what he meant. But, you know, people are dumb and don't understand what the hell that the internet existed before it was made public, but that's another issue entirely. So this is the thing. They're already now here at the end of 92 talking about this. It will come to fruition in 94.
Okay. So, final piece of news, or not really news, but a final tidbit for tonight is that you think that the Deadly Moves ad is just bizarre. So I tried following this link you put here, but I can't see it actually because it doesn't preview on the archive. So tell me what's so bizarre. It
doesn't?
About this? No. I need to download the CBR file.
Oh, okay. So this is in GamePro magazine. I will. The link is in there. You've got to download it. The actual page, I'm going to show it to you now. And it is the most bizarre thing I have seen in a very, very long time. And I don't know who the frag approved this, because it just makes no sense to a intelligent human being. So, okay. We're dealing with a ad in a magazine for a fighting game on the Super Nintendo. Okay? And you would be thinking, as a sane human being might, that a Super Nintendo game, you know, is going to have some pretty good graphics. It's, you know, top of the line system, blah, 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 blah. And what they end up doing, and the game actually doesn't look terrible. It probably plays like ass, but it doesn't look terrible. And it's got these cool parallax scrolling effects in the background and stuff. It's a one-on-one fighter. Instead of showing you screenshots, they've had what I can only describe as the teenage intern draw something really fast in their lunch break, and they added it to the ad. And let me see if I can share the screen here with you, because it's I'll cut some of this out. And for everybody else, this is page 41 of the GamePro issue that we are talking about. And I have to stop sharing, start sharing. This is the artwork.
What?
Exactly.
What's this?
I don't know.
That can't be gameplay footage.
No, it's not. This is just hand-drawn nonsense.
That is weird. Yeah, you should go, listeners. You should go check this out. That's good fun.
Yeah, and sorry, it's not Super Nintendo. This is for the Genesis.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And for the Genesis especially, it's doing some amazing scrolling work. And if you compare it with the actual gameplay of this, or just screenshots of this, which is probably the easier thing to compare it to. I mean, just the name of the game is Deadly Moves, which you know the conversation happening at the studio was, how can we get onto the Street Fighter bandwagon as quickly as possible?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a thing called Mortal Kombat coming out. We'll call ours Deadly Moves. And it's also does come out on the on the Super Nintendo.
Mm.
So
yeah, those screenshots look a lot better than that hand-drawn atrocity they had on the magazine.
Yeah, I mean it just makes no sense at all.
I wonder what happened there. Okay.
So
they paid bizarre for a full page ad, and they put that in there.
Exactly. And I know this is an audio podcast, and people at home are like, no,
you need to go check it out. You need to go check it out.
It's just bizarre, beyond bizarre. So, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why. Especially the victory pose.
It looks a bit like a CDI title, if I'm completely honest.
Oh, Prince, or whatever the frag line is. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what this looks like.
Mm.
Only not as professional. it
must have hurt saying that.
Oh, it's so bad. It is so painfully bad. Sorry, when I was browsing through the magazines, and I actually jumped over this real quick because I mean, when I'm just looking for news stories, the ads usually don't matter. But I jumped over it, and I was like, wait a sec, what was that? And I went back, and I was like, what? And then I zoomed in, I was like, what? Okay, yeah. So, that's the conclusion of the show today, everybody.
Yes.
We only have one order of business left. Mads, what is the word of the episode?
So, considering the amount of times we've been talking about that platform, it has to be Sega.
I can only concur with that one. So, everybody, remember to follow us on the socials. Everything that we've talked about, links are in the show notes. Mads, where can everybody find your fine work?
They can find me at the Retro Asylum, where I podcast about old stuff, and at Playthrough, where I podcast about newer stuff. Not new, but newer stuff.
Not quite as old stuff.
Not quite as old stuff, yes.
I can dig that. Keep up the very good work. Love it all. And everybody, have fun.
Bye.